Hi, and welcome to Redneck MBA. Today we're going to discuss the Iceberg of Ignorance and where it meets transformational management by walking around. In 1989, Sidney Yoshida introduced the concept in a study where he tells us that management, top-level management, is only aware of 4% of the problems within a company. As you go lower down in the hierarchy of the company, you learn that the next level management is aware of about 9% of the problems within the company, and as it trickles on down, that the frontline employees are aware of 100% of the problems that the company faces. This is the concept known as the Iceberg of Ignorance. Transformational management by walking around is the way that we melt the iceberg of ignorance. By getting out in our company and learning what's going on in the company, we find out ways to shrink the levels of hierarchy between the top level and the bottom level, as in how to get the information of what's wrong with the company from the bottom to the top. Transformational management by walking around is a new name for an old concept. The old concept was management by walking around, or as Sam Walton is quoted as saying in the book In Search of Excellence, management by walking about. Now, transformational management by walking around is really just an old name, a new name for an old concept. Proponents of transformational management by walking around state that it's not the same thing as management by walking around, because they say that transformational management by walking around has a purpose, as in they're seeking to make a change within the company. But does anyone doubt that when Sam Walton walked around Walmart, that he had some idea about what he needed to change and learning what he needed to change within the company? Or that when John Wanamaker or Charles Schwab walked around their different organizations, that they were walking around not just to walk around, but to actually find out ways to improve the company? My thought on this is that transformational management by walking around is simply a new name for the old concept. In his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie tells us of how John Wanamaker was once walking through his store, which he was prone to do, when he noticed that there was a lady who wasn't being waited on, was standing patiently at a counter, while his employees were around in a huddle, shooting the breeze, bullcorning, or what have you. Wanamaker quietly slipped behind the counter, waited on the woman, finished her transaction, and handed her package to these employees to be wrapped and finalized. Now, does anyone doubt that Wanamaker needed to say anything to these employees? The mere fact that he was there, the mere fact that he had to wait on the customer, should have said it all. Wanamaker was practicing management by walking around. Another example of management by walking around that Dale Carnegie introduces in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, is where Charles Schwab, who was in charge of the U.S. Steel Corporation at the time, was walking through one of his plants. The plant was falling way behind the other plants in steel production. Charles Schwab walked through the plant and said to one of the men just coming off the day shift, "How many heats did you make today?" The man responded, 6. Charles Schwab, in the presence of the plant manager, took out a large piece of chalk and chalked a huge number 6 on the floor. He said nothing about it. Later that night, as the night shift was coming on, they wanted to know what this large number 6 was on the floor. And the people around responded, "Well, the big boss was here today. He asked how many heats we made, and he chalked a big number 6 on the floor." Well, by morning, the night crew had rubbed out the big 6 that Schwab had written and replaced it with a 7. They had made 7 heats during the night. They didn't want to be outdone by the day shift. And this went on and on as each shift tried to outdo the other shift, back and forth. Then finally, this plant that was woefully behind all the other plants was now way ahead of all of them, merely because they realized that what Schwab was interested in was how many heats they made. And they all knew that Schwab was paying attention. This was management by walking around, and Schwab didn't even have to be there after that point. In his book, Made in America, Sam Walton renames the concept management by walking around, or what he would was quoted as calling management by walking about as management by walking and flying around. Because by this time, the writing of the book, he used an airplane to fly from one store to another so that he could be in any given store in the country any day of the week that he wanted to be there. He'd fly from one and go to the other. And so employees never knew where he was going to pop up, but they knew Mr. Sam was watching. Sam often would show up on the loading dock at night with fresh coffee and donuts, would sit and talk with the different truck drivers, wanting to know what's going on in the different stores. He figured who would know better and be objective about what was going on in the different stores. Truck drivers would visit multiple stores so they'd be able to have one store to compare it with. So which store seems to be doing the best, which store seems to have the best morale, best attitude, and that type of thing. And from time to time, you'd hitch your ride in the truck and pop up in the store. So employees never knew where Mr. Sam would pop up. And this is true management by walking around. Not this thing that you see with Undercover Boss where it's staged and the guy cries and passes out money and they sit around and sing Kumbaya, that type of thing. That's not management by walking around. That's a photo op. And once we see an employer, the boss of the company, get out into the stores, get out into the plants, get out into the field with his employees, that's management by walking around. Sam Walton was actually introduced to management by walking around by none other than J.C. Penney, the king of business, the king of the department store. One day, J.C. Penney was visiting the store that Walton worked in. Walton was involved in the J.C. Penney store, and Mr. Penney showed Sam how to tie a package very neatly using a minimal amount of paper and a minimal amount of string. And this way he showed Sam what's important is serving the customer and at the same point in time being frugal with the company's resources. This was a lesson that Sam learned and took to heart. Now we can shrink or melt the iceberg of ignorance when the CEO of the company comes in, gets behind a register, and starts waiting on customers. When the CFO of a company gets behind a pallet jack and pushes it around, stacks boxes, where other members of top management are out there unloading trucks, waiting on customers, actually working in the store, maybe mopping a floor. They learn by being there. You can't learn anything in the C-suite, not about what's going on at the lower levels of the company. You need to be in your organization. You need to be in the plants, in the distribution centers. You need to ride in the trucks. You need to push the pallet jacks. You need to get out there and actually see what's going on. You can receive reports and read reports all day long, but they're going to be skewed, and that information doesn't trickle up the way that it should. Remember, the people on the front line know all the problems within the company. The people on the top know only 4%. Let's melt that iceberg of ignorance. Let's get into those organizations. Let's get into the front line. Serve time on the front line at least once a month. Get out on the front line, and don't do it as a photo op. Don't do it as merely being there. Get out and do the actual work. Scrub those toilets, mop those floors, load that merchandise, make a display. Look to see, if you were in Walmart, if I was the CEO of Walmart and I went in and I saw how whoever designs these mods, whoever designs these planograms doesn't realize that when there's only 5 foot of shelf space, you can't fit 6 foot of merchandise in there. How when you have cases of 24 of an item that you can't try to squeeze only 12 on there and then have to put the other 12 in the back room. So get out there, get in the store, see what's going on, learn from what's going on. That's what made good companies great. That's what made companies built to last. Now when you take your eye off the ball, when you're not in the stores, when you're not on the front lines, when you're not in your plants, when you're not in the trucks, you can't know what's going on. It's simply not possible. A computer printout, a computer monitor display will not tell you all of the story. Shrink that iceberg of ignorance. Learn by transformational management by walking around.